Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this video I'm going to review some rap songs by Earl Sweatshirt. This is the third full-length album coming from rapper Earl Sweatshirt, if you count out his self-released mixtape Doris, and this is his first album after his absence from the rap game for 4 years. Earl started blowing up, being one of the biggest members of Odd Future, and then he released his critically acclaimed Doris and I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside, with the last one being one of the most critically acclaimed albums of this decade. Now, it is known that Earl had some pretty big issues with his mental state and his mental health, which is one of the main reasons he wasn't releasing music up until this point, and he just went into such a big hiatus. And going by this album and considering some of the previous works he has done, it was kind of expected that his new album was going to be extremely personal. He was going to just talk about his mental state, his mental health, and to that extent everyone was expecting something big from him. The first disc from this album was an interlude which was included into the last album from Vince Staples' FM, an interlude that just prepared people that a new Earl Sweatshirt album is coming soon, which is a short verse from him. Up until this point he dropped 2 teaser tracks, Nowhere to Go and The Mint featuring Navy Blue, and also this album cover over here, which looks like it's out of a dank meme. And the 2 teaser tracks were pretty okay, were pretty decent. I like the flow and I like the poetic approach through his lyricism and through his flows. The production on the most parts was really lo-fi and with some samples just repeating themselves, having some glitch and experimental elements through them, which is familiar through his previous album. But the issue I was afraid I was going to have through this album is that through these teaser tracks I thought they were sort of unfinished. They just felt like snippets. Earl's poetic approach and lyricism is incredible, but other than that, I was hoping for more out of it. And the album drops, and it's just 15 songs, and it's 24 minutes long. Like, what is this? Is this a grindcore album? Every single track over here is just a minute long, and only 2 of them were actually passing the 1 minute mark, being 2 minutes long. So I was really worried that the direction that I was going to be with this album is just some sort of filler songs, some tracks that are going to feel unfinished, and we're just gonna have this lo-fi delivery with some decent sampling and some decent instrumentals, just repeating themselves over and over again, only for Earl to just rap over them with this unique approach into this like spoken word kind of motif, and then the track just ends, and then we just go into the next cut. And unfortunately, this is pretty much the case with this album, which it's not necessarily a bad thing, but there were so many moments where I was extremely underwhelmed with this album, because there are so many occasions where lots of the tracks just felt unfinished. So the only thing I could just really grasp out of this album is that there were gonna be some moments where I would really gonna love the instrumental. There were gonna be some moments where I would have some highlights from this album, but I would think that the rest of the tracks just would need some more structure, or I would need something more out of it other than just a minute mark. And don't get me wrong, there are some really good moments on this album. First of all, the track Nowhere to Go is one of the best of the album. It has a really dark sound that really manages to just stand out instrumentally from the rest of the album. It has this really glitch and weird instrumental, and his flow just goes perfectly into this song. So it kind of makes sense that he could release this as a first single, but still, this track doesn't feel complete. It's just the same thing, just going for a minute and a half and just ends. The album starts with the song Shattered Dreams, which is actually the intro of the album, and it's actually the second biggest song of the album, going into 2 minutes and 21 seconds long. And it's a good way to start the album. I think that instrumentally speaking, it's a really good cut. It really prepares you for what this album is going to stand for the rest of its length. And I think that instrumentally speaking, the sampling throughout of it is really good. And the beat is chill. I like the looped sample, and Earl's flow and delivery is pretty good. And like I said in the beginning, this sounds easily as his most emotional album and his most personal personal album. The lyrics of this thing are really dark and really hits you with all the issues he's been going out of all these years. And it really makes you hope that things are actually going to be better for him, because he seems to struggle so much considering the lyrical content of this album. And you're just hopeful that his mental state is going to be better in the future. Red Water starts with a fade in. The beat and the samples are really glitchy, and I like what I hear, but it's still like it's too short. It doesn't feel complete. It's like something is missing. However, I still think that this is one of the best moments of the album instrumentally, and I really like the beat. I really like the instrumental, the looped sample, the glitches throughout of it. But the track that really managed to stand out for me the most is The Bench. This has easily the best instrumental of this album, at least for me. For me, that was the most mind-bending and more mind-grabbing instrumental throughout this whole album. I really love the sampling out of this thing. I really like how it just aggressively cuts all of these parts and just loops them into this just glitch and experimental fashion. The track actually reminds me so much of Lost by Danny Brown. It just has sort of the same way with the sounds, the way it cuts the loops, the way it just sounds so creepy and so unsettling. But the track once again is too short. I'm sure that I would love the song even more if it was more fleshed out, if it was going more of it. But when you pretty much hear the first seconds, you know how the rest of the song is going to go, because it just keeps this abstract formula of the beat just repeating itself. So even if the tracks were like 2 or 3 or 4 minutes long, it's just going to be the same thing, just with a bit kind of accented. So in a sense, I really like and I really appreciate the direction he took with this album, because it really just works as a narrative album, even though I think that some of the cuts cut really abrasively and doesn't really fit of how we go from one track to the next. But this is more of an album which works as an entirety, as a whole thing, rather than grabbing each track individually. And it just portrays this narrative, this concept behind it. So it doesn't really feel like an album that it's worth actually mentioning every single track out of it. As a full album, as a full experience, there are just some few moments where I really think that the album just manages to really stand out, and when it stands out, it's actually really good. But for the most of the part, I just feel underwhelmed by some of the track lengths and some of the beats and the sounds that don't really managing to really grab my attention. However, some of the easily most notable songs out of this album actually come through the end of this, and I'm talking about the track playing portion at first, because this is one of the tracks that goes into a kind of bit of a different direction from what the rest of the album is doing. This is a mostly instrumental cut which has this bit, once again repeating itself with its glitchy fashion and experimental approach. But this track actually features samples of his mother talking about him, and there's an audio clip of his father reading his poem Anguish Longer Than Sorrow. And it actually makes sense for him to really put this track out, considering that his father actually passed away this year, and the track actually manages to be extremely emotional, especially considering the context of the album and everything that has happened before that. And the other track that also needs an extra mentioning is the track Riot, which is an instrumental outro of the album, which is simply a song with the same name, made by a South African jazz musician and close friend of his father, Hugh Masekela. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. However, you get the point. This is also an extremely passionate and extremely emotional track. Just the whole feel to it, with his lo-fi production and all this glitchy way he has actually took the samples and put them together. It's a really nice touch, and I really appreciate it as a way to finish the album. However, other than that, there are not any more things that I can think of that I could just talk about each song individually. Tracks like Ontheway, Azucar, and Eclipse just redoes some extremely forgettable songs that don't even manage to grab my attention. They're just extremely short for the most part. Earl's delivery throughout them is pretty much the same. You know, other cuts like December 24, On the Way, and Lucy actually don't manage to bring something really special, like instrumentally. Like, you know, December 24th has this like 90s vibe bit to it. Then Lucy has such a nice instrumental, but it's just 1 minute long. It's the shortest on the album, and you know, just when I start enjoying it, it just ends. And then we have Peanut, which you know reads like a semi-instrumental song with Earl having his vocals glitched into so many different parts throughout the song, and that's pretty much it. Overall, the production of this thing, it's extremely lo-fi, and you know, for the most part, I don't really mind it, but there are some moments where the production feels extremely muddy. Easily the most impressive thing about the album in terms of structure and production is that it has multiple glitches and so many parts of experimentation throughout most of the cuts, which actually manages to stand into the narrative of the album. And the impressive thing about it is also that Earl's delivery manages to fit so good in them, because they're actually really hard bits to rap to, and for Earl to make it in such a great way is actually impressive. And I think that lyrically speaking and in terms of delivery, this is easily the best album from Earl Sweatshirt. His flow has this sort of spoken word vibe to it. His voice and the whole way of speaking manages to be extremely emotional and really captures you and make you feel with him. But I think the other thing that also ruins the album is that through most of the tracks, the mixing of the vocals is actually really lower compared to the music. The music is like, it's not like really loud, but then you have the vocals which are even lower than the music most of the time. And that's one of the weakest parts of the album for me, because especially given the context of the album, I actually think that the rapping and the spoken word parts are the ones that have to be up front. Like, I think this album really focuses way much on the lyrical standpoint. So when you have the vocals really buried in the background, it actually ruins in some way what the album actually tries to present. But you know, other than that, at the end of the day, this actually feels like some rap songs. In a sense, it feels like a filler album. It feels like a demos. It's like 15 unfinished songs which are just put together without that much of a connection between them. And there are some highlights on the album, and there are tracks that manage to stand out. And not gonna lie, like I said, I think that Earl's flow and delivery on this thing is absolutely spectacular. His lyrical content, the passion, the emotion behind it. This is easily the most emotional Earl Sweatshirt album, but this also feels easily the most unfinished. This feels like the most demoish, and this is also probably my least favorite Earl Sweatshirt album, with the only thing that probably will make me come back to it is just some individual songs, or just you know, as a whole thing, just because it's an extremely short album. I like what I got, but I think there was potential for even more than that. I'm gonna give this album a 6+ out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, and why? And what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.